All right. So today I want to share from Acts chapter 27. Is a story I've been thinking about for a while now. Let me share my screen. I hope my sound is loud and clear.
Yeah,
Okay. So I'll share from, oops. Okay. Is my screen showing now?
yeah,
All right. So Acts chapter 27, we'll read from verse. Okay, so let's start from verse 9. Kofi, you can help me. So verse 9 to 12.
okay. Verse 9. Now, when much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Men, I perceive that the voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. And because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete opening towards the southwest and northwest, and winter there.
Okay,
When the south, okay, okay,
let's jump. We're gonna jump to verse. Okay, so let's do from verse 18. Yeah, from verse 18, Kofi.
from verse 18. And because we're exceedingly tempest tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day, we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. But after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore take heart, men. For I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island.
Okay, yeah, so that's okay for now. So yeah, I've been thinking about this story, and I think this week came to my mind again because Pastor shared something about how the disciples lived on Sunday, and he was saying the situation that they had to preach the gospel is largely different from what we have now. So after Jesus Christ died and gave them the Great Commission, go out, preach to everyone that you find that their sins have been forgiven. It was met with a lot of hostility. And at the time, the Jews, the chief priests, and those people really, really persecuted them, right? And for which reason all the disciples died in some horrific ways, right? I think they crucified Peter upside down, and then John was even fried alive. That one didn't work. But there were all sort of horrific ways that they killed the disciples of Jesus finally. But before that, they went through tribulation after tribulation, persecution after persecution, and nothing could stop them. Nothing could bring their hearts down. They just had one purpose to preach the gospel, and no challenge was able to overcome them. So, and Pastor was saying our situation now is very different, and it's true. When we check what the persecution that we face today is just disagreement or rejection of the doctrine you are preaching, or that's basically all. It's not life threatening. It's not some danger and all. So as I was thinking about it, I realized, wow, it means that we have, or I have, a very weak heart in preaching the gospel, because the challenges I face now, they are not even one tenth or 100 of what existed before. But Paul, in his testimony, he said, I am a debtor. In Romans chapter 1, he says that I am a debtor. So let me just go there quickly. Yeah, Romans 1. So verse 14, it says, I am a debtor to both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to wise and to unwise. So as much as is in me, I am ready to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome also. So this word debtor, I kept thinking about it, right? Debtor means that, like, you owe, right? You owe someone. So if I borrowed money from, say, Kofi, now I become a debtor to Kofi until I pay off that money. Now, Kofi is more like a creditor. He gave out that money. Now, Paul is not saying he is a creditor to Greeks and to barbarians, which, I mean, in my thinking would be right. He has the gospel, he has received the gospel, and he's sharing sort of a gift, right, to these people, because without the gospel, they cannot be saved, right? But then what he is testifying is that he's a debtor, rather. Like he owes everyone the gospel. Like he has to pay. He owes everyone the gospel. So, like, it was really profound to me where Paul's heart was, right? So thinking about myself, do I actually have this heart? Do I actually think of the gospel I've received like this? That now I've been entrusted with it and I'm a debtor to everyone. I'm a debtor to my family members. I'm a debtor to my friends, to my neighbors, everyone who is around me. I am owing them, like I owe them the gospel. Like I have to pay back. I don't know about you guys, but it's really profound and quite opposite to the normal way of thinking, right? So I've been thinking about that as well. So as I was just thinking about how they lived, I remember this story in Acts as well. So this time, Paul was being sent to Rome, and God had purposed it like that because he wanted the gospel to reach Rome as well. Paul was to stand before Caesar and preach. But in the journey, they had so many difficulties. And actually, Paul had been captured as prisoner. So it's not like he's just making a voyage on his own. But he had been captured as a prisoner, being moved, and were traveling by sea. So as they were going, actually the Spirit of God revealed to Paul, and he warned them that the methods of sailing, right? They should take heed and then do this and do that and do that. But they ignored him. So as we're going, they realized that things were changing, the weather changed, the wind that was blowing and everything was very massive. And all of a sudden they realized, hey, we are in danger, right? We are in serious danger. And it's very easy to read the story and yeah, that's it. I mean, they were traveling and they had a lot of issues. Actually, they had shipwreck at the end of the day. Their ship was destroyed completely. And we can just read that story and move on. Yeah, that's what happened and all. But this time around, I was trying to just place myself in the story and in the center of everything that was happening and try to imagine really well. I don't know if you guys have been in situations where like you feel your life is actually threatened or it's possible you can die. But when I thought about it the situation now became like serious and serious and serious. And like the gravity of it really went up in my mind and in my heart. And I realized, wow, actually, this was a very serious situation. So imagine I'm in the middle of the sea somewhere traveling, and all of a sudden this like serious wind and storm hits us, right? Such that like it's just not stopping, and everybody can realize we are all going to die, right? Like you really start to feel the fear and the pressure. So this was the situation they were in, and when everybody was now seriously scared, Paul now speaks to them and says this. Okay, so I'm back to chapter 27. So let me take it back a bit. So it says, when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their desire, putting out to sea, they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous headwind arose called a rock Clydon. So when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive. And running under the shelter of an island called Clauda, we secured the skiff with difficulty. When they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship, and fearing lest they should run aground on the Syrtis sand, they struck sail and so were driven. And because we were exceedingly tempest tossed, that's being tossed here and there, the ship was just being rocked everywhere. And because we're exceedingly tempest tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. So they took out a lot of luggage and stuff in the ship just to make sure that it's not heavy. And 19, on the third day, we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we will be saved was finally given up. So that's how serious the situation actually was. Like they got to the stage where they realized, oh, okay, now we know we will die, right? All hope was completely lost because for many days they had not seen sun nor even stars. So you like the sun and stars would mean that everything has, calmed down and we are back to normal. But for many days, it was only storm and tempest. So in this situation, Paul now spoke to them. So 21, but after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. And indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore, take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. So, this is what Paul said to them. And I was really thinking about it. The situation hadn't stopped. They were still battling with the storm and everything. And I'm sure even when Paul was saying this, it wasn't under calm circumstances, right? The whole wind was rocking the boat and everything, and Paul is telling them this, right? And he's giving them a promise. He says, An angel stood by me, and what he told me from God specifically is that I must stand before Caesar, meaning the journey will be successful. And not just that, but God has granted you or granted Paul all those who sail with you. So, meaning none will be lost. So, there are two opposing situations here. One is the fact that they had finally given up, after trying all their best. They're sailors, they have skills. That's not the first time they've been on the sea. So, they know exactly what they are doing. They've tried everything, all of the methods, till they got to the stage where all hope was lost. Everybody could feel that, oh, okay, we've tried everything. As for this one, we will perish. So all hope is lost on one side, but then Paul is giving them a word or a promise that is completely opposite. So Paul is saying, according to the God that I serve, all those who are sailing now with me, none shall be lost. No one shall be lost. For God has promised that I, Paul, have to stand before Caesar to preach the gospel. And he has promised that everyone who is sailing with me would actually be alive. So I was thinking about it. If I was part of these sailors, can I actually believe this? After all that we've gone through and we are going through, can I actually just subscribe to this message and this promise? Like, what is the basis to say that, okay, I will not die? Like, I will be saved. How really can I believe this? And then I'm also thinking, how could Paul believe this with all his heart? Like, even though he was also within that same situation as a prisoner, how could he actually believe this with all his heart as well? Yeah, so let's think about it too. As we live our spiritual lives, as we receive salvation, as we are preaching the gospel to people, it seems as though we will not have challenges, but there are many challenges. There are so many difficulties. You solve one, the next one comes. So it does not stop. Just that the gravity of the challenges we are facing now is it cannot be compared to what the disciples faced then. So let's compare it and we realize, oh, actually the challenges we are facing now, they're just peanuts challenges. It's just very, small challenges that we are facing whilst preaching the gospel. But what stays the same is that God gives us promise within the challenge. Actually, before the challenge, God gives us promise. And what we see is different, but what actually prevails, we have to know. We have to be completely convinced. We have to be completely aware of what the end is going to be. So, in this story, after Paul had given that promise, no one will be lost among you. When we continue, we see the situation even getting worse. So let's go down. So I'm going to read very fast. It says, now when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land, and they took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little farther, they took soundings again and found it to be 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern. Okay, let me change the version so that we can easily understand it. So let's do NLT. Okay, so we're reading from 27. So it says, about midnight on the 14th night of the storm, as we're being driven across the Sea of Adria, the sailors sensed land was near. They dropped a weighted line and found that the water was 120 feet deep. But a little later, they measured again and found it was only 90 feet deep. At this rate, they were afraid we would soon be driven against the rocks along the shore. So they threw out 4 anchors from the back of the ship and prayed for daylight. Then the sailors tried to abandon the ship. They lowered the lifeboats as though they were going to put out anchors from the front of the ship. But Paul said to the commanding officer and the soldiers, you will all die unless the sailors stay aboard. So the soldiers cut the ropes to the lifeboat and let it drift away. Just as day was dawning, Paul urged everyone to eat. You have been so worried that you haven't touched food for 2 weeks, he said. Please eat something now for your own good, for not a hair of your heads will perish. Then he took some bread, gave thanks to God before them all, and broke off a piece and ate it. Then everyone was encouraged and began to eat. All 276 of us who were on board, on board. After eating, the crew lightened the ship further by throwing the cargo of wheat overboard. When morning dawned, they didn't recognize the coastline, but they saw a bay with a beach and wondered if they could get to shore by running the ship aground. So they cut off the anchors and left them in the sea. Then they lowered the rudder, raised the foresail, and headed towards shore. But they hit a shoal and ran the ship aground too soon. The bow of the ship stuck fast, while the stern was repeatedly smashed by the force of the waves and began to break apart. The soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners to make sure they didn't swim ashore and escape. But the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul, so he didn't let them carry out their plan. Then he ordered all who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land. The others held on to planks or debris from the broken ship. So everyone escaped safely to shore. Right? So we could see the details of what happened, right? And even after Paul had given the promise, it looked like, okay, then there will be some signs that will show that, okay, what Paul is saying is true. But what ensued is that now they suffered shipwreck, right? The ship now scattered, and what they had to do was those who could swim jumped into the water, and those who could not stayed on parts of the ship in the sea, right? So there were no signs to show that actually the promise that Paul had given will come to pass. But what was sure was that the promise was true, and the outcome of it, or the end, was definitely going to be true. So Paul promised them no one will be lost. Not a hair of your heads will be lost. And truly, at the end, everyone, all 276 people who are aboard the ship, were saved successfully. What am I saying? We've also been given a promise. We have all received a promise from the gospel. Concerning our sin problem, we have received a promise. And Jesus says, none of us will perish. So let's read quickly John chapter 10. So John chapter 10, I'll read from verse 27. It says, my sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one can snatch them away from me, for my Father has given them to me, and he is more powerful than anyone else. No one can snatch them from my Father's hand. The Father and I are one. We have received this promise as well. Through the cross of Jesus Christ, all of our sins were washed. And Jesus promises and says, none of us shall perish. So just like in the story of Paul, the promise was given in the beginning. So many things happened within that time, right? And the situation looked like, no, it's never going to materialize. They went into different modes, different difficulties, but the end was according to the promise. Same way our end is going to be according to this promise that we've been given. Now, beyond that, to us, we live in life, we have all these promises as well in the scriptures. So promises concerning our health, promises concerning our daily lives, promises concerning our finances, every aspect of our lives, God has given us promises in his word. In the same way, we should be convinced that the promise has already been given in the beginning, and the end is going to be according to that promise. So that as we live within those two boundaries and we see the various difficulties, we have full boldness and confidence to actually take them head on, because the end is going to be according to the promise. So I wanted to share this with everyone as well, so that we'll be reminded to look for these promises, right? As I think about this, now I want to look for promises for every challenge that I face. Look at the promise carefully, and then I can prophesy the end, so that the day in, day out, the challenges that I face, I can meet them with the end in mind. I can meet them strongly having faith that, yeah, what I see is not true, but the end is going to be according to the promise. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll end it here. Amen.